This is the instructional video for the Region 18 Middle School Bass Etude for 2024. For this etude, there are some points we'll cover in this instruction video today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the fact that the key of the piece is E flat major, which means we have 3 flats in the piece that we have to deal with. And because of that, a lot of this piece is going to be played back in half position. So for you people with tape, that's behind your first tape, which requires a very large hand spacing, so we'll talk about that. The second thing we'll talk about is the 3/4 time signature. Since 3/4 is an uneven meter, we only have 3 beats in every measure. That means the bowing can be turned around from measure to measure. Also, we have several instances in the piece where the rhythm creates uneven bowing, and we're going to talk about what to do in those situations. The other thing we'll mention is that there are no slurs and no dynamics in this piece. So we're going to try to go for an even mezzo forte, medium loud sound throughout the piece and good intonation. So we're going to want you to try to stay focused on having good rhythm and good pitch for this. First thing let's talk about is the key of E flat major, which means we have 3 flats in this piece, B flat, E flat, and A flat, okay? Because of that, a lot of the piece is in half position. So the E flat is first finger on the D string, just behind the first tape, just above the open string. Okay. We also have B flat in half position on the A string with the first finger, so low B flat. And then we have a high B flat, which is the one just above the top line of the clef, with the 4th finger on G. We also have A flat, so first finger on G. So you probably don't play this key a lot in school, so it's a good thing to practice playing in half position with a very wide hand spacing, because this is the lowest position we play. It requires the widest spacing in our hands. You could warm up by playing E flat to F on the D string. Making sure you feel that your hand has a good stretch. You move over to the A string and play B flat to C. First finger, 4th finger. And you can also move over to G and play A flat to B flat. So make sure that this is really in tune, and then make sure your hand has a good wide spacing to play those half position notes, first finger to 4th finger. All right, let's talk about 3/4. So this piece is in 3/4, so 3 quarter notes per measure, 3 beats per measure. And because it's in 3/4, it means that sometimes our bow will be a down bow on the beginning of the measure, but it will then be an up bow at the beginning of some measures. And that's okay, but it takes some getting used to. It also means that sometimes we'll have some rhythms that mean we will have longer bows followed by shorter bows. So we need to get used to being able to play with the full length of the bow, but also to control the speed of the bow on some of the longer notes so that we can stay in the upper, the frog, between the frog and the middle part of the bow. So what I would suggest doing is putting on your metronome in 3/4, and you can practice playing the E flat major scale that we just talked about in 3/4. So if we look at this piece, it has several different rhythms. It's got half notes, quarter notes, and 8th notes. And sometimes it has a combination of half notes and quarter notes. Sometimes it has a combination of quarter notes and 8th notes. We could start by simply just playing 3 beats of E flat for our scale. Playing with a full bow, okay? We can also practice playing individual quarter notes for each note. So 3 quarter notes. You might notice I used a different fingering that time. We can practice eighth notes. So we're going to do 6 eighth notes. Now, some of the challenges of this piece being in 3/4 is that we have uneven rhythms. So the very first measure has a half note followed by a quarter note. We can practice this by playing the scale where we play a half note, so 2 beats, and then a quarter note for the next note. And we play up and down the scale with that rhythm. And the thing we're going to focus on is trying to keep our bow even. So if I don't watch my bow, I'll end up with something like this. So you can tell now I'm way too far out in the bow because I'm using the same amount of, I'm using the same bow speed for my half notes that I am for my quarter notes, and it's causing me to go all the way out to the end of the bow. So I'm going to try to use less bow for my half notes, and the same amount of bow I use for my half note, I'm going to try to use for my quarter note. So that's tricky. So that's a way to work on that. Now, another thing that we want to practice is the idea that we start with the down bow in some measures, and then we end up with the up bow in other measures. So we could take the first 2 measures, which is a half note, a quarter note, and 4 eighth notes, and just practice playing that rhythm and get used to starting some measures with the down bow and some measures with the up bow. So I'm going to do the first 2 measures, the rhythm of the first 2 measures, but I'm just going to play it with E flat. Okay, here we go. So you'll see that if I take this rhythm for the first 4 measures, that measures 1 and 2, you're starting with the down bow on the first 2 measures. But measures 3, you're starting with an up bow. So your bow's going to get turned around, but that's okay. We'll talk a little bit more about the bowing for the piece further on. All right, let's talk about the fingerings in this piece. The music that's provided for you has 2 sets of fingerings. There's a set of fingerings above, which are a more complicated set of fingerings, and then there are a set of fingerings below that are a more simple set of fingerings. I approach this with less shifting, so I'm going to give you even another set of fingerings that I think work best for this piece that require a lot less shifting, and also means that you probably will have a lot less intonation errors, right? So we're going to stay mostly in half position. So starting at the very beginning of the piece, we're going to play the first 6 measures up to the second beat of measure 6, all in half position. So we're going to ignore the fingerings that are in the piece, and we're going to play all that in half position. All right, so it sounds like this. So all the way up to the B flat in measure 6 can be played in half position, right? Then in measure 6, now we're going to shift for the first time. So our first big shift is going from this B flat to C. So that's the first shift that you're going to need to practice in the piece. When you play the B flat 8th note in measure 6 to the C 8th note. It's going to go 4th finger to 1st finger. There's lots of ways you can practice that. You can practice it by simply playing each note, moving back and forth, so that you can make sure you're right. Sometimes I like to have people slide into position. So in this case, I'm going to have you slide from the B flat up to D, and then put your 1st finger down. So we're going into 3rd position. So you're going to want to practice that. It's not a big interval, but it's a big shift for us. So this is measure 6. So see that big shift right there? Okay? The next shift we're going to have to do is from the D in measure 6 to the E flat in measure 7. So it's a very small shift, right? And this one, we're just going to move from our 4th finger D to the 4th finger C, or E flat, sorry. 4th finger D to 4th finger E flat. So you can practice that by sliding. I like to slide, practice my shifts by sliding, because that way I get used to staying in touch with the string and not lifting my hand off the string. So D to E flat. So I'm going to play measure 6 all the way up to the first note in measure 7. 2 shifts. Shift, shift. Big shift and small shift. Okay? Now, when we're playing measure 7, we're going to start with that E flat, and we're not going to shift for the D this time. We can just play those 2 notes, and then we have to shift back into 2nd position for the C. So that's a big shift. And then another shift from 1st finger B flat to A flat. So 2, 2nd finger D to C, 2, 4, 1st finger B flat to A flat. Shift, shift. And then we're going to stay in half position. The fingering that's written in the part is very different than this. I think this is an easier fingering. Okay? Now, starting in measure 8, we're already in half position, and we're going to stay, this time we're going to stay in half position from measure 8 all the way till almost the end of measure 14. So we're going to ignore the fingerings that are written in there, and we're going to keep all this in half position. So this is measure 8 to the 3rd beat of measure 14. Once we reach this B flat in measure 14, now we're going to have to shift again, right? But we can play all of measure 8 through the 3rd beat of measure 14 without shifting, okay? Now, once we get to measure 14 and we get to that B flat on beat 3, then when we want to go to the C, we're going to have to shift again to C. So 4th finger B flat to 1st finger C. This is the exact same shift that you did in measure 6. Okay, so here is measure 14. Right, so we're going to shift on the C, shift. All right, and then in measure 15, we're going to play that D with our 4th finger. Okay, and then in measure 14, we're going to shift again after we play the C, back into half position, and stay in half position, okay? So this is measure 14 and 15. All right, I'll say where it shifts again. Shift, shift. Let's look now at measure 17. So this is a tricky spot because now you have to start on the high E flat. You don't get to work up to it in a shift, right? So you have 1 beat to get from here to here, which is a big move, right? So this is where I like to tell people to practice sliding up to the note. So we can do that several different ways. If we want to, we can slide on our 1st finger from E flat to A flat. And then put our 4th finger down on the G string for E flat. Or we can play E flat, then we can slide from B flat to E flat. that's a big shift. So you can see we gotta go from here all the way to here. So, but we have a whole beat to do that, right? So we can play. So don't wait until you get right to the downbeat of measure 17 to make the shift. Make the shift as soon as you have the rest. So I'm going to play shift. And then I'm ready to go. All right. So when you have a rest, make the shift during the rest. Don't wait until you've got to play the note to make the shift. Now let's look at measure 17. We have this descending scale. All right. So this is how I would play this scale here. I would start with the fourth finger E flat, and this is going to be very similar to the way we just played the scale in measure 7, but now it's quarter notes, so it's a lot slower. So we're going to play 4, 2 for D, shift to C, fourth finger, first finger B flat, first finger A flat, open G. All right, so 2 shifts, shift for C, shift for A flat. And then we'll stay in half position. So this is going to be measure 17, 18, 19, and 20. Once we get to measure 19, we're in half position for the whole of measure 19 and 20. So here we go. All right. All right, now on measure 21, we also have a descending scale, but this time it's starting on D. Also, we'll be doing a large shift from half position in measure 20 into the third position D in measure 21. So once again, we're going to want to practice getting from this half position up to third position D. Now, the thing we can do is we can do the same thing we did before where we slide. So in this case, we'd slide from B flat to D. Okay, so not very good that time. Let's try it again. All right. So that's half position, B flat, sliding up to D. Okay, so I'm going to play measure 19, 20, and then the downbeat of 21. Should be like this. Now you'll notice that as soon as I play the open D, I immediately shift to the D in third position, right? So don't wait while you're playing the D, you're holding it, you're moving the bow, and your left hand is shifting into position. Okay, once again. So get immediately into position. Now, in measure 21, we're going to play the scale with the fourth finger, first finger C, and then we can shift back into half position. Okay, so once we shift back, we can stay in half position, right? So let's do that. 4, 1, shift. Now, we can stay in half position for extended amount of time. So in the original and the copy that you have, there are several different fingerings, measure 26, 27, then there's also some different fingerings in 23 and 24, I believe, that require some shifting. However, starting in measure 22, you should be able to play all the music from measure 22 to measure 30 in half position. You don't need to shift at all for any of that section. So I'm going to start measure 22 and I'm going to play up to measure 31. So I'm going to play 22 through 30 in half position. Okay, here we go. Beginning in measure 31, we will need to shift to get to the C. So in measure 31, we're in half position. When we play the A flat, we can shift to our first finger for B flat, C for the fourth finger, back to B flat, and now back to A flat. Okay, that's one way. Or we can shift from B flat fourth finger to C fourth finger. So 2 two options. 1, shift 1, 4, 1, shift back 1, or 1, 4, shift 4, 1, shift. Okay, so here's measure 31, or, okay, then in measure 32, we're going to start in half position, and then we're going to shift right here for the B flat. All right, so 1, 4, open, 1, shift, 1, 4, 1, shift back, 1, open, 1 again, 4, 1, open, shift back, 1, 4. All right, so let's look again at measure 32, 33, and 34. It's a little tricky, okay? So we start in half position in measure 32 on the E flat first finger. 1, 4, open, A flat 1, shift to your first finger, B flat, fourth finger C, B flat in measure 33 is first finger, shift back, first finger A flat, open G, A flat, shift again, first finger B flat, fourth finger C now in measure 34, and then first finger F, and then shift back when you play the open G, and play first finger A flat, and now fourth finger F. So let's look at measure 34 a little bit closer. I'm playing the C with my fourth finger. That allows me to play the F with my first finger on the D string. And then I use the open G as a chance to shift back to half position. First finger A flat, fourth finger F. So here's how that goes. All right, let's look at the fingering starting in measure 43. So from measure 35 all the way up to measure 43, you're going to stay in half position. Then when you get into measure 43, you're going to have to do some shifting. And at measure 43, there's one spot that is a little bit tricky with this different fingering that I've come up with. So starting measure 43, we're going to start in half position. So first finger, open G, fourth finger, open G, first finger, fourth finger. In measure 44, shift back to your fourth finger for B flat, first finger for A flat, shift up to your first finger for B flat, fourth finger C, second finger D, and then E flat in the next measure. All right, so this is beginning in 43. I'll play it slow. Again. All right, so that's a lot of small shifts in there. It's kind of unavoidable at this point in the piece. You can certainly use the fingering that is written for those measures. That would be fine. This fingering, though, is coming from being in half position up to that point. All right, so starting again in measure 43, and then we'll talk about measure 45. So now this is just that scale that we've had several times, so we're going to do the same fingering here. 4, 2, 4, 1, 1, open. All right, then we're going to go back up the scale in measure 46. 4, open, 1, 1, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. So we basically played the same thing twice. So measure 45, 46, and 47. And now stay in half position for 48. All of that, measure 48, 49, and 50 can all be done in half position. Then at the end, we're going to have to shift again. So open G, this is measure 51. Open G, first finger A flat, first finger B flat. And now at the end, instead of shifting back, it's easier if you just play E flat on the A string with your first finger. And make sure you've got a good stretch in the hand there. Make sure your E flats are in tune. And that's another one where you're going to want to get set while you're playing the fourth finger E flat. You can have your first finger ready to play. You don't want to shift. You don't want to move your hand. You just want to have your first finger ready to move right over. All right, so this is measure 51 again. All right, so those are some fingerings that I think will work for this piece. You're certainly welcome to use the fingerings that are written in the piece. It is going to require more shifting though. All right, so even though there's no slurring in this piece, there are still some challenges to the bowing. One of those challenges is that sometimes, because we're in 3/4, our measures are going to start on up bows instead of down bows because of the odd meter. All right, so if we look at the very beginning of the piece, the first two measures, both are starting on down bows. So here's the measure 1 and measure 2. All right, but measures 3 and measures 4 both start on an up bow, and they sound almost identical to measure 1 and measure 2 because they're the same rhythm, starting on an up bow. So our goal here is to make measures 3 and 4 sound the same as measures 1 and 2. All right, and we can do that by staying from the middle to the frog of the bow. If we stay in that part of the bow, that can help us control the sound a little better because we have the most control over the sound at this point. All right, we can start the string a lot easier. So I'm going to play that passage again. I'm going to try to keep it in this part of the bow, okay? Now, another thing I have to be aware of when I'm playing that is I have uneven note lengths, right? So in the very beginning, I have a half note and then 2 quarter notes. Right? The half note being longer means I would use more bow. If I use a normal amount of bow, then I'm going to end up here, out in the further part of the bow. So sometimes when I play my half notes, I need to slow my bow down just a little bit so that I don't end up so far out. So regular. Now I'm way out here. Slower bow on the half notes. Now I'm still in the top half of the bow. All right. Now, that same issue occurs again when we get into measure 25. And in measure 25 and 26, we have a repeating rhythmic pattern, but the bowing is turned around from measure to measure. So starting in measure 25, I'm on a down bow. But on measure 26, I'm on an up bow. Measure 27 is also on an up bow. But measure 28 is now on a down bow. So the rhythm we have is repeated over and over again, but the bowing is turned around from measure to measure. So we have to work to make sure that as we go from measure to measure, when we start on an up bow, it's not any different than when we start on a down bow. So starting in measure 25. And then this same pattern starts again in measure 33, where we have a rhythmic pattern that repeats over and over again, but the bowing changes. There's only 2 places in the music where they provide a specific bowing for you, and that is in measure 6 and in measure 14. In measure 6, and they're the same, measure 6 and measure 14 both ask you to play a down bow on the second beat. So I'm going to play measure 5 and measure 6 with the requested down bow. So here's measure 5 and measure 6. So notice that I have to retake my bow because in measure 6 I'm playing a down bow on the down beat. Okay. that's one way to play those two measures. Now, you can also change the bowing slightly so that you can still end up with a down bow on beat 2. And we do that by playing 2 up bows in a row in measure 5 and the downbeat in measure 6. So I'm going to go down, up, up, down, up, down, up. And then that way I'm playing a down bow on the second beat of measure 6. So here that is again. And notice even though my bow goes up for both notes, it sounds like 2 separate notes. So it should sound the same as if I played without doing 2 up bows. So here it is with 2 up bows. Okay. The same thing happens in measure 13 and 14. So if I do the bowing as it is, then I have to retake the bow in the second beat of measure 14. But I can do the same thing here where I can do 2 up bows in a row. And it has the same effect that it does in measure 5 and 6. Alright, so even though there are no slurs in this piece, it is good to practice the different types of bowing that you have to do related to rhythm in this piece. There's half notes, quarter notes, and eighth notes, and a combination of those which creates uneven bowing, which we talked about in measures 1 and 2. So if you want to practice this, you can set your metronome on 3/4 and just practice some of the rhythms. For example, let's start with the rhythm in measure 1, where we have to play a half note and a quarter note, and we're going to try to keep it in this part of the bow, and so that as we play the rhythm over and over again, we don't gradually work out to the end of the bow. So if I don't make an adjustment for the half note and play it with a little bit slower bow, then you'll see what happens. So here's without making an adjustment for the half note. So you can see that if I keep doing that, I'm going to run out of bow, right? So we have to do slower half note speed, and then the quarter note is going to be a little bit faster. So we're going to try to keep it in this part of the bow. Now we've got mostly quarter notes in here, so we can always work on playing our quarter notes. Going for a nice even sound. Same thing with eighth notes. And it's important when we get to the eighth notes to not be too stiff with the hand. So if I'm doing, we don't want it to be all shoulder movement. We want everything to be loose. And we want to make sure our wrist moves. Alright, so that concludes the instructional part of our video for the middle school bass etude for 2024 for Region 18. Just to recap, we want to make sure that we really focus on our half position hand spread. Since we're in the key of E flat, we're going to play a lot of half position, so we want to really work on making sure that our hand is good and wide in half position. We're going to focus on shifting when we have the shifts that we need to go up into E flat, when we have to go up to these upper positions. We're also going to work on our bowing. We're going to work on uneven bowing, half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note. We're going to work on even bowing. We're going to work on trying to keep our bow in the middle to upper part of the bow, between the middle and the frog. All right? And since there are no dynamics or slurs in this piece, we're going to try to go for a smooth sound. We're going to try to go for a nice even sound, not too loud, not too soft. We're going to try to keep from avoid having a wispy tone or digging in too much. Nice even tone, nice relaxed. All right, So next we will have a video where I'll play through the piece with the metronome at tempo, and then I will also play through the piece at a slower practice speed. So good luck and thank you for watching.